Sigelela Tina Lusapolayo Murena Buluka Sichaba Sahesu Uferi said in Twali Maswene Usibuluke Sibuluke Sichaba
the decision makers. Blessings to those that lead with inclusivity. Blessed be the marginalized, the vulnerable, the poor, the children, the differently abled. Bless the environment, the water, and the air. Imisebenzi yenu iyancomeka. Nisezinyathelweni zikaRholihlahla. Zenibambe maqhawe. Yiyo lonto ndibhoga, ndibhodla, ndigiya. Ndiwuvula lo mcimbi. Ndithi yeham.
Allow me to invite our opening address, which is going to be delivered by the Gauteng Premier and Co-President of Metropolis, Mr. David Makhura.
Thank you, Godfrey. The Deputy Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs in South Africa, Honorable Andries Nel, the Acting President of the Metropolis and the Mayor of the City of Berlin, Councillor Michael Muller, and fellow co-presidents who are here with us, the President of the South African Local Government Association and the United Cities and Local Government, Councillor Pakstau, the Secretary General of the Metropolis, Mr. Octavi de la Vega, the Secretary General of the United Cities and Local Government in Africa, Mr. Jean-Pierre Elong Mbasi, distinguished mayors and governors from metropolitan cities and city regions across the world, members of our Gauteng Executive Council, members of the diplomatic community, leaders of business and civil society, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Goeiemorgen, bonjour, Jambo Africa, Sanbonani, Dumelang, Dimacheroni, Abshen, Lochani. Welcome to Africa. It is my distinct pleasure and singular honor to welcome you all to Metropolis 2018 Annual Meeting held here in our beautiful province, in our country, South Africa, in the mother continent of Africa. I welcome you back home because this is the cradle of humankind. This is the place you all originate from. Why is this meeting of mayors and governors of large metropolitan cities and urban regions of the world so paramount to the future of humankind? I would like to suggest that there are three reasons why this meeting is very important. The first reason is that we live in a time in which rapid urban migration is one of the dominant trends of this century. More than 50% of the world population, translating into more than 4 billion people, live in cities across the world. Here in South Africa, already 60% of our population live in cities. It is estimated that by 2050, 70% of the world's population will live in major cities and urban regions across the world. It is further estimated that most of the rapid urban growth that will happen in the next 30 years is going to be coming from both Africa and Asia. It is therefore important that we think about the impact of this urbanization on the quality of life of our citizens. It is also important that we check our boots as governors to ensure that the quality of governance will not lag behind. The second reason why this meeting is important, in addition to urbanization, is that the cities and city regions are the key and major engines of the global and national economies. All national economies, and indeed the global economy, is driven by major cities in the world. Today, cities account for more than 80% of global GDP. The cities and city regions have assumed a far greater role in the structural transformation of the reality of the global economy today. The third reason why this meeting is important is the very theme of the annual Metropolis meeting, the theme of inclusive cities and inclusive city regions. Why, if I may ask Acting President and Secretary General, why did we choose the theme of inclusion? Why is it important at this time in the history of the world that we must talk about inclusivity, inclusion, and inclusiveness? This takes me to a very important reason why we are meeting. We meet in an era of great exclusions and rising inequality. We meet in an era where leaders are elected on the basis of generating fear and promising to exclude the others. Whilst urbanization offers city residents opportunities for a better life, cities that lack the character of inclusivity will become dangerous places to live for many of humanity. Because many cities and city regions have become spaces that feature urban poverty and hunger, lack of security of tenure, resulting in homelessness and landlessness, extreme levels of inequality between the rich and the poor, economic marginalization of the majority of the residents of the city, special exclusion and special injustice, and this often on the basis of race, gender, age, class, in some cities, religion, and in many cities today, the place of origin. Leaders form political parties, and parties are elected into government on the basis of promising to exclude. So we live in an era where exclusion is a fundamental question that we must grapple with. So as leaders of subnational governments at city and regional level, we have to choose whether we want to build cities and urban centers characterized by the twin evils of fear and hatred, existing side by side with exclusion and inequality. Or we want to build different types of cities, cities that embrace diversity, cities that embrace inclusivity, and cities that thrive on equity. That is the choice we have to make, and the Metropolis has chosen to embrace diversity, inclusivity, and equity. The mayors and governors who are gathered here have chosen not to use fear and hatred as something around which to mobilize people, but to embrace diversity, to embrace the other, and to live on the basis of the urban promise, and that the urban promise belongs to all of humanity. So we have a responsibility to turn our cities and city regions into hubs of inclusive growth and sustainable development, which offer a good quality of life to all citizens regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of religion, regardless of your place of origin, regardless of class, and regardless of age. And we in Africa and Asia have a particularly daunting task to ensure that this urban growth and rapid urbanization that is taking place in our continents, and that's going to be the dominant contribution to urban growth over the next 30 years, must result not in exclusion and inequality. We should stand for a different type of urbanization, again, which is inclusive, which embraces diversity, and which champions equity. We are glad that the United Nations is significantly dedicating time now to look at this important question about the role of cities and city regions in the UN system itself. Of course, as we say this, we always operate within the framework of our own countries, within the framework of our country's national development plans, and in Africa within the framework of the AU Agenda 2063. But we are also looking for opportunities to push the boundaries. We're also looking for opportunities to change the game. And cities can be great game changers. So we need to take ourselves very, very seriously, because we are where regional governments and city governments are much closer to where people are. And in particular, we in Africa want to make sure that Africa's unique kind of urbanization finds expression in the new urban agenda. There's very specific, unique conditions we face as African cities and urban regions. We also want to assert the fact that Africa cannot be left behind in the context of the prospects of the fourth industrial revolution. We in Africa live in cities dominated by young people because we are a youthful continent. And yet unemployment is the most serious challenge that faces us as cities and regions. We also have a specific challenge about the role and place of women in our cities. There are major structural impediments that prevent women from contributing meaningfully to the well-being of our cities and our regions. The question around access to education, healthcare, access to water and energy resources. All these issues are important if we are to truly talk about inclusion. So I welcome you here, and I call on you to join hands with us. We in Africa, we are ready to build more inclusive, sustainable, and equitable cities and city regions. And I would like to conclude by making reference to the fourth reality that you come to our country in a very special year. in the year we celebrate the centenary of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela welcomes you to South Africa. The spirit of Nelson Mandela can be felt across the length and breadth of our country and indeed across our continent. So as we meet and deliberate here, let's be inspired by Nelson Mandela's determination and desire to build a country and a continent, and indeed a world that is fair, inclusive, and sustainable. I want to conclude with a quote from Nelson Mandela when he addressed the United Nations General Assembly in 1998. And I quote, "I will continue to hope that Africa's renaissance will strike deep roots and blossom forever, without regard to the changing seasons. Were all these hopes to translate into a realizable dream and not a nightmare to torment the soul of the aged, then will I indeed have peace and tranquility. Then would history and billions throughout the world proclaim that it was right that we dreamed and that we toiled to give life to a workable dream," close quote. You are welcome to the 2018 annual meeting of the Metropolis, and I wish this meeting success. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Asante sana. Rolibua.
May I take this opportunity to invite Councillor Msimanga. He's the Executive Mayor of Tshwane Metropolitan Municipality and ICLEI Africa Regional and Global Executive. Worship.
Program Director, Mr. Godfrey Mtizwa, the Minister or Deputy Minister of COCTA, Andries Snell, Councillor Park Stow, the President of SALGA, and United Cities and Local Government, Mayor Michael Muller, the Mayor of Berlin and the Acting President of Metropolis, the Secretary General of Metropolis, Madam Octavia de la Verga, Premier David Makhura, MECs Panyaza Lesofie, Ntate Uhuru Muila, Mme Faith Mazibuko, Ntate Ishmael Vadi, Mme Barbara Creasy, fellow mayors and governors and officials of different cities from all over the world, esteemed guests, all protocol observed. It is a great honor to be invited to be part of the panel to open the Metropolis Conference 2018. This conference is being held within the Gauteng City region, of which the municipality that I lead, the city of Tshwane, is a part of. The Gauteng City region is the economic hub of South Africa. It is also an economic pulse of the continent and thus a magnet for inward migration, both within the country and the continent. High rates of migration to Gauteng City region has largely been driven by the search for economic opportunities, meaning that it represents hope. Hope of a better life, hope of a better tomorrow. Migration patterns and characteristics have transformed both Tshwane and the Gauteng City region as a whole. It is safe to say that we have become a cultural melting pot. Those three words have such a romantic ring to them. They make the Gauteng City region to sound cosmopolitan, embracing and receptive of different cultural experiences and a home for all. Being the administrative capital, Tshwane is certainly a melting pot, and it accommodates over 150 embassies and have numerous tertiary institutions and attracts students from all over. The Premier was saying that Gauteng is attracting more than 200 people a year. The reality is Tshwane is attracting over 10,000 people every month. And that comes with its own challenges, and that comes with its own necessities in terms of how we plan for the future. How are you able to accommodate as many people that are coming into your cities? How are you able to ensure that you are able to attract investment so that you can create opportunities of work, economic upliftment of the people, but also being able to accommodate as many people that you're attracting into your city? However, the underbelly of this infusion of migrants is tension and resentment spawned by the sense of scarcity and deprivation. Poverty, inequality, and unemployment are toxic ingredients for the cities that are grappling with high influx of migrations or migrants and tend to fuel speculations and perceptions that migrants steal jobs and economic opportunities. Tshwane has not been passive in this regard. In the city of Tshwane, we have the sustainability think tank known as the African Capital City Sustainability Forum. In essence, it is an annual gathering of mayors and senior technical officials from the African capital cities and serve as a vehicle for thought leadership based on the premises that the African capital cities have a duty to lead by example. As a network of African capital cities, it aims to promote sustainability leadership as part of the solutions of addressing the rapid rate of urbanization impacting all African cities. Again, the Premier has highlighted that it is in the cities that you see the most when it comes to issues of climate impact. When there is water that has run out, as we've had in the Western Cape in certain parts, it is the cities that have to grapple with the challenges that come from there. When you have floods, it is the cities that have to grapple with that particular issue. Now the question is, where are the cities represented when international or national leaders meet at COPs and voicing out their concerns? I've always maintained, and when I went and represented South Africa at COP23, I've maintained that our decisions should start from the local government upwards. It should never start from the top downwards. I always say to the Premier, you'll never hear people going too much to the President and say, my toilet is blocked, or my road is not functioning as it, or we don't have tarred road, or we don't have water, we don't have electricity. It's always at a local level, from the Premier, the mayors, the councillors, that will always take the brunt. And therefore, how we plan and how we implement what then become the drivers of change, it needs to start at a local level. We have heard at COP about the targets that we have set ourselves in terms of the global warming, the 2% that we speak about. But who are the real implementers of this if it's not the local government, the local and provincial government? We know what our contributions are towards global warming. And therefore, we should be the one that is leading the charge to say, this is what we now need to do in order for us to change and to have a greater impact in terms of what is happening at a national level. And I'm glad that we are here meeting, and we are here to plan and to share ideas in terms of what we are doing to change that. As a network of African capital cities, we also want to promote and we want to make sure that we share ideas, we share plans, and we also share expertise in terms of how we are going to ensure that this continent plays its role towards the 2060 vision that we have. The sheer reality that is confronting us all is that by 2030, more than half of Africans will be living in cities on the continent. The resultant pressure and inadequacies of services will lead to poor and worsening living conditions of large populations within our cities. A mere 3 months ago, I hosted another installment of the forum, and it is now more evident than ever that the leadership role can only be fully assumed with intense and sustained exposure of best practice in urban management for environments that are heavily constrained. We have the opportunity to leapfrog from the learnings of our more advanced peers and implement solutions that have been successfully tried and tested elsewhere. I was very humbled during the last forum, whilst during our mayor's roundtable, a closed session involving the delegations only, the issue of civil unrest bubbled to the surface. In the room was the representative of the mayor of Khartoum and the mayor of South Sudan, or South Juba. So essentially, local government representatives of both Sudan and South Sudan were in the room. It is well known that these two stages are at loggerheads, and at the bottom line is that it is their cities and towns that are most impacted during such a strife. Firstly, because it is a trigger for intensified urbanization, and secondly, it increases the impact that the extreme damage of infrastructure has on the health and well-being of innocent civilians. Vulnerable groups in the cities experience the brunt of the mayhem. In a noble gesture, the two representatives, in full view of the rest of the mayoral delegations, shook hands and pleaded peace. Whilst this act was clearly symbolic, the reality points to the role that the cities are steadily assuming in an African context. The same can be said for climate change. The traditional approach to addressing climate change is for the nations to stage or to nation states to declare national determined contributions and negotiate mechanisms to achieve these commitments through the United Nations Framework Convention of the climate change, or the Convention, on climate change. However, since the conference of the parties held in Paris in 2015, cities across the world have stepped up to the challenge with tangible vigor. This global movement of cities-led are also supported primarily by the international local government organizations and associations such as the C40 Climate Leadership Group, the ICLEI, Local Government for Sustainability. It has also become a force to be reckoned with. The voice of local government increasingly speaks in unison and demands full recognition at the international negotiating table, articulating and seeking relief from horrific climate impacts. Local government requires rapid capacity building and technology transfer so that our service delivery models are informed by current, affordable, and low-carbon technologies. We also understand that we have a crucial role in bending the curve and reducing harmful greenhouse gas emissions. No longer willing to be spectators during these negotiations, political leadership is at the local government level is gearing up to stand shoulder to shoulder with national leaders to ensure that meaningful ambition in setting and attaining these national determined contributions is really achieved. The forthcoming conference of the parties in December 2018 will be a testimony to this resolve. The role of international and local government associations in mentoring and nurturing cities to be responsive to complex urban management issues as well as forward thinking is a role we should all embrace and should never be underestimated or overlooked. There is no start or end to advocacy and capacity building. These are the functions that will never be saturated, and there's always a need to ensure that local government leaders and structures are thinking ahead and practicing foresight in terms of how we plan for the future. This year's Metropolis has created a platform for us to address the issues of inclusivity and that of focus resonating with much of what I have said thus far. If we are unable to welcome and accommodate migrants, allowing them to reach their full potential, we cannot claim to be inclusive. If we cannot provide urban environments that are safe of all residents with special thoughts to gender, age, disability, and health, then we also not profess to be inclusive. If we cannot dismantle the apartheid special planning, as the Premier was alluding to earlier on, and promote mixed land use, we cannot claim to be inclusive. If our policies and plans do not take informality of board, whether it is housing, transport, trading, recycling, to mention but a few, then we can also not claim to be inclusive. If our capital and operational expenditures do not target and prioritize areas that are classified as socially vulnerable, then we too cannot claim to be inclusive. Therefore, my wish is that by the end of this conference, we will have come to grips with what is meant by inclusivity in real terms and its full application, as well as the action that are required by cities and the city regions to achieve inclusivity. In this city of Tshwane, we have two urban nodes that are on the brink of developing urban development frameworks. The one area is currently poor, marginalized, and mostly hidden, and the other is wealthier and far better resourced, but with hidden poverty. I would like to see the principles of inclusivity applied to both these frameworks within the aim of leveling the playing field and also ensuring that we create an environment that all will live in harmony and enjoy the proceeds of a good planning by a caring administration. Enjoyable for all who share common space, irrespective of their social economic profiles. This is how we will really start to see equality taking meaningful shape in an environment that historically exposed inequalities and differences. Again, I thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel that is opening the Metropolis Conference 2018. And I wish the organizers and the delegates a more successful and productive process of engagement. The theme is on point, and I've ensured sufficient representation of city officials in the parallel sessions that will be taking place here in the following days. And know that I, for one, with the assistance of the team Tshwane, will take a lot back home. Allow me to close with a quote from one of the Africa stalwarts who recently passed on, Ntate Kofi Annan, who said, and I quote, "To live is to choose, but to choose well, you must know who you are and what you stand for, where you want to go, and why you want to get there." We cannot fail the people that have placed so much of their hopes on our hands. It is time that the cities and the governors and the mayors really take their stance and ensure that indeed we can give our residents, we can give our people a future that they will proudly say, we are here and we are home. Thank you very much.
Our next guest is the governing mayor of Berlin and acting president of Metropolis, Mr. Michael Muller.
Honorable Premier Makhura, fellow mayors, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Metropolis Annual Meeting in Gauteng. My sincere thanks go to our hosts. They are welcoming representatives from cities on 5 continents, and thank you very much for this great opening ceremony. The singers and dancers, they are very impressive for us all. And Premier Makhura and Mayor Msimanga, thank you very much for your important speeches. I can assure you that African cities will play a major role in our network of cities. Ladies and gentlemen, this year Nelson Mandela would have turned 100. I very much respect this great man. He once said, "What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the life of others that will give our lives significance." That is what Metropolis is all about. Our big cities are changing at a rapid pace. We can see the right here in Johannesburg, where we held a very successful meeting 5 years ago. Change also means improvement. Many governments, also in Africa, are doing a lot to promote democracy and fight corruption. I'm looking forward to a very diverse conference program. Our annual meeting is showing once again how active our city network is. We meet, we exchange ideas and experience, and we make decisions together. We develop strategies for the future of our cities, and we put these into action. Our cities are very vibrant, as is our cooperation for the benefit of our cities and their residents. For me, as the acting president of Metropolis, this is a very special annual meeting. I associate my responsibilities with very specific goals and demands. One of these goals is expressed in the theme of our meeting, inclusive metropolitan cities and city regions. Urban policies no longer apply to just the inner city. Around the world, cities are growing at a rapid pace. Today, cities represent half of the world's population. That means that urban policies and urban development have a profound impact on global development. The mayors are the voice of the majority of humanity. The challenges faced all over the world are especially pressing in cities. Energy efficiency and climate protection are just two examples. 2/3 of the energy used worldwide is consumed in cities. Here, more than anywhere else, climate protection needs to be paramount. Or take the conference focus, inclusion. Big cities are safe havens for the growing number of refugees. And they are places of longing for immigrants. We must ensure that the people of our cities can live together peacefully. And we must ensure that migrants have the same opportunities as everyone else. They should be able to participate in the progress we make and become productive members of society. That includes housing. Everyone should have the right to decent housing. That is the #1 social issue. That includes education. A good education means opportunities for all. That also includes things like transportation and healthcare for our rapidly growing cities. Our diversity is our strong point. We talk to each other and learn from each other. We show global policymakers how to deal with key challenges of the future. That's why our voice must be heard. Metropolis is a strong voice of cities worldwide. Our network works to uphold everyone's rights, and especially the rights of women. One important point here is gender equality. We are counting on the work done by Metropolis women. These are all important themes of our conference. We will send a clear message of strength and unity. The election of a new president is part of that. Also, we want to have more political debates at our meetings. In conclusion, I would like to encourage you to do whatever you can to make Metropolis an even better city network. Our strength lies in our cooperation. We shape the fate for more than half of the world's population. This fact gives us great responsibility. The Metropolis City Network can and must live up to this responsibility. With this in mind, welcome to the 2018 Metropolis Annual Meeting. Thank you very much.
May I invite now our next speaker, Councillor Parks Tau, President of the South African Local Government Association and United Cities and Local Governments. Councillor.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Deputy Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, the Honorable Andrew Snell, Co-President of Metropolis and Premier of Gauteng, Mr. David Makhura, together with members of your Executive Council, the Acting President of Metropolis, Mayor Michael Muller, together with members of your board, Executive Member of ICLEI, a member of the Global Task Force of Local and Regional Governments, Mayor Msimanga, mayors and presidents of metropolitan regions, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media. Let me first congratulate the co-president of Metropolis, Premier David Makhura, for hosting this annual statutory meeting of Metropolis, but also for placing the important issues of collaboration among Africa's major cities and city regions as crucial in advancing socio-economic development for all of Africa. Furthermore, the Premier's championing of the increased participation of regional governments with a specific focus on city regions, is celebrated in Metropolis in particular, but also in the broader UCLG family. To our Metropolis members, I bring with me greetings from our more than 240,000 member villages, towns, cities and regions at the UCLG, affiliated both directly as members and through their associations. Many a time we say at UCLG, we are a network of networks. Dear friends, it is known to all of us that by 2050, 68% of the world's population will reside in cities and urban centers. This is bound to bring great changes to the way we have organized ourselves as societies. By 2030, there are expected to be over 40 cities with over 10 million people living in them, and we will need to participate, or rather to anticipate these changes and rise up to new challenges. It is incumbent upon all of us gathered here to mobilize our various constituencies and relevant stakeholders to ensure that we learn from each other. With this mobilization and marshalling of our collective energies and resources, it's required that we ensure that we create strong, democratic, and inclusive metropolitan governance systems. If we do not ensure that we create a true system of local governments where all, big and small, can play a role, then we would be compromising the survival and sustainability of our cities and regions, and our societies will not be places of opportunities, but hostile spaces where the worst inequalities are fostered. We cannot and should not let that happen. I am well aware of the efforts that metropolises all over the world are making towards transformation, towards sustainable societies. There is a driving force in metropolitan areas and regions that we will need if we want to bring change about. It is for this force and innovation that we will rely on you, our metropolitan section, to bring to us the experiences, the know-how, and of course, the political leadership. The most pressing issues that communities face, issues such as decent housing, mobility, energy and water access, education, decent work, can no longer be looked at within the traditional urban boundaries. This is why we need to address multi-level governance and renewal, because by addressing the future in cities, we will be addressing the future of humanity. The urban landscape will shape the lives of communities, whether they live in cities or not. And while we need to drive our metropolises, our urban future requires a new concept of metropolitan governance that includes smaller cities and links with rural areas. Only through an integrated territorial approach will we be able to improve the lives of both urban and rural dwellers and achieve the ambitious goals that are common to all of us. One thing that became clear with the presence of local and regional governments at the high-level political forum in July this year is that achieving the global goals will only be possible if we seize the opportunities of urbanization and bringing decision-making to the closest levels, and that is the citizens. This is why we, as a global family of local and regional governments, are bringing our voices to the United Nations at the same time as we try and enhance our knowledge, accountability, and efficiency in our communities. This is what we describe as localization of the global agendas and what UCLG is actively contributing to through our Local for Action Hub. The UCLG Local for Action Hub will be places where our member where members gather at different levels and create interdisciplinary relations and further promote policy innovation that can influence global processes from local knowledge. The active participation of stakeholders during the last international policymaking processes, such as Agenda 2030, Habitat 3, the Paris Accord on Climate Change, and the unprecedented participation of local governments through the Global Task Force of Local and Regional Governments, which the UCLG is privileged to facilitate, are testimony to the great potential that we can tap into by being part and parcel of the international community. We are convinced that it is now high time to enhance the quality of the involvement of the activities that emanate from the ongoing partnerships with the United Nations. As we stated during the UN high-level panel that I had the privilege to co-chair, and I quote, "Partnerships predicated on a mission of genuine inclusion, not just the delivery of participation as a project deliverable, imply a seat at the table for all stakeholders who might not historically occupy that position," close quote. It is in this spirit that we support the vision of UN Secretary General that if the global agendas are to be achieved, the UN development system will need to respond to national demands for inclusive alliances and participatory processes that take into account the needs of the most vulnerable and excluded. As we are convinced that the constituencies of local and regional governments need to bring to the table and take into account the voice of the most vulnerable and excluded. In this regard, we should take note of the progress we are making at different levels with the United Nations. The hosting of the first high-level forum of local and regional governments in July this year under the auspices of the United Nations High-Level Political Forum is significant in advancing our stated objective for a seat around the table. It is at this forum that Ms. Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of the UN, committed to the creation of a direct access facility for local and regional governments to access the needed financial and technical support. Together with the creation of the United Nations Localization Hub for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, we are bearing testimony to major advances that have been made over the past few years in our engagements with the UN. Emphasizing the importance of subnational governments in attaining the global goals towards 2030, President Muller and I, together with colleagues in the Global Task Force, were implored to ensure that our members assume their rightful role in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals when the Deputy Secretary General said on behalf of member nations, "We need you." As the level of governments most engaged with addressing exclusion on the ground, local and regional governments must be high on the list of priorities of the UN and international institutions. This is why one of the main efforts as President of UCLG, with your support, is ensuring that our constituency is at the core of the decisions that will end up shaping the future of humanity. Dear friends and colleagues, let me be clear. We would not be here today if it was not for the strength that we have shown together as a constituency and our willingness to unite around the Global Task Force, but also and most importantly, our capacity to unite in our century-old system of networks of local governments. Allow me to take this opportunity to commend the Metropolis leadership for the significant efforts being made to ensure strong synergies between our respective organizations, that is Metropolis and UCLG, and for their significant contributions to our global movement. I'm convinced that this is only the beginning, that we'll be able to ensure greater synergies and amplify our voices even more with our local for action agenda. Let this meeting in Gauteng mark this renewed era of collaboration. Thank you very much.